You've found nightfall murmurs. When day fades into silence, the world begins to whisper. Some stories come as murmurs, some as warnings, but they all come at night. Don't be afraid to listen, but never listen alone. My lantern's arc sliced through the gloom, snagging on a gaze. Not just lost, but hunted, feral, and the cold certainty washed over me, colder than the sea spray. I hadn't pulled a soul from the tempest's maw, but ushered a wolf across my threshold. 10 years almost, I've stood sentinel at Cormorant Head. A solitary vigil, yes, but the kind that settles deep in the bones. A welcome weight. The ocean's vast indifference, the gull's sharp cries. These are my familiars, preferable by far to the clamor of cities. My days measured by the sweep of the beam, the endless battle against salt rime on glass. This night, however, was carved from a different stone. For days the horizon had bruised, thickening with a malice the forecasters called catastrophic. I secured Cormorant Head, fed the generator its fuel, and braced for the siege. Wind shrieked its banshee lament around the stone tower. Rain hammered the lantern glass, seeking ingress like frantic fists. Below, the breakers detonated against the cliffs, a ceaseless artillery defining the night's brutal majesty. It was the sort of elemental rage that shrinks human concerns to insignificance. High in the glass crown, tending the great lamp's pulse, my eye caught a discordant twitch in the chaos below. Flotsam, I first assumed, some splintered offering from a ravaged vessel. Then, unmistakably, an arm thrashing against the black water. A jolt, sharp as lightning, pierced my solitude. Someone. Out. There. Thought dissolved into instinct. Emergency pack. Oilskins. The spiral stairs blurred beneath my descent. The gale met me like a physical blow at the tower door. I fought down the slick, perilous track to the cove, leaning into the wind's solid wall. Monstrous waves exploded on the shingle, spray blinding me. There, a fleeting shape, swallowed and spat out by the churning sea, tossed with contemptuous ease. To enter that maelstrom was death. Instead, the lifeline. I whirled the rope, its weight a familiar counterpoint to the storm's roar. "Here!" My shout torn away by the wind. "The line! Take it!" He turned, a pale smudge fighting the relentless drag. My first cast fell short, swallowed by a wave. The second, yes! Fingers clamped onto the sodden cord. "Hold fast!" I roared, digging my heels against ancient stone, taking the strain. It was like anchoring a runaway ship. His dead weight, amplified by the ocean's fury, fought me for every inch. Sinews shrieked, breath burned, but I hauled, hand over blistering hand. Slowly, agonizingly, he emerged from the surf's grip, a large man, broad-shouldered, somehow still clinging to life. He stumbled the final feet, collapsing onto the wet stones, a heap of ravaged humanity. My training surfaced through the adrenaline. "Injured?" I yelled over the din. "Can you stand?" A choked nod, a racking cough expelling brine. I hauled him upright, taking the brunt of his weight, staggering back up the path. Inside the thick stone walls, the storm muted to a dull roar. We dripped and shuddered, gasping in the sudden stillness. "Thought I was gone," he rasped between coughs. "Warmth first," I countered, guiding him to the Spartan comforts below. Before the cast-iron stove, swaddled in wool, a steaming mug trembling in his grip, life seeped back into him, and I saw him. Younger than the sea ravage suggested, perhaps 30, a face carved with harsh lines, a taut stillness beneath the exhaustion, an energy held fiercely in check. "Elias," I offered, breaking the silence, "keeper of this light." He took a long draught of the tea, his eyes deep-set, watchful, meeting mine briefly. "Silas," he returned, "indebted." I let the warmth work on him before asking, "That storm's a killer, Silas. How did you end up swimming in it?" A flicker, quick as a snake's tongue, crossed his features. "Trawler," he muttered, swamped suddenly, went over the side. The words fit, yet they felt hollow. His attire, though soaked, lacked the ingrained wear of a seaman, and the exhaustion in his eyes seemed older, deeper than mere survival. But the sea teaches patience. I let it lie. "You're secure here," I assured him, rising. "The worst should pass by dawn. I'll raise the Coast Guard, arrange your passage back." He gave a slight nod, but his knuckles whitened where they gripped the mug. "Appreciated," he said, his voice flat. I led him to the small chamber reserved for infrequent visitors. "Rest now." Closing the door, a disquiet lingered, a discordant note in the lighthouse's familiar harmony. I dismissed it. Fatigue, the storm's residue. The storm retreated, its fury diminishing to a sullen groan. I moved through my duties, the tower breathing around me, yet acutely conscious of the stranger sleeping below. Then, near the grey hour of dawn, a sound, the subtle protest of an old floorboard, out of rhythm with the tower's size. I stilled. Again, nearer. Turning, I found Silas framed in the watchroom entrance, his face obscured by shadow. "All right?" I kept my tone level. "Need something?" He advanced a step. Only then did I see the glint of metal in his hand, the heavy spanner from my own toolbox. My breath hitched. "Elias!" His voice was a low burr, charged with tension. "That call, to the guard, you can't make it." Understandee crashed down, cold and brutal. No fisherman, a fugitive. The sea hadn't tried to claim him, it had delivered him. "Silas," I began, hands raised, palms out. "Whatever this is, violence won't solve it." A raw, jagged laugh escaped him. Too late for solving, way too deep. He stalked forward, I retreated, the abyss of the stairwell yawning behind me, the lantern room suddenly a cage. "Let me walk away," he urged, voice tight. "Erase me from your night." I shook my head slowly. "You know I can't. Whatever waits for you ashore, adding this..." A fleeting uncertainty crossed his face, instantly replaced by grim resolve. "Never going back." He erupted into motion, the wrench whistling past my ear as I instinctively dropped. Thrown off balance, he staggered towards the gallery railing surrounding the great lens. I launched myself at him, a desperate bid to disarm. We wrestled, a frantic, clumsy dance on the precipice. Outside, the wind still clawed at the tower, its howl swallowing our grunts, the scrape of boots on metal. His strength was formidable, born of desperation, but mine was fueled by the primal need to survive in my own sanctuary. Then, a slick patch of rain-wet grating betrayed him. His eyes widened in sheer terror as his balance failed, tipping him out over the low railing. An arm lashed out, fingers snagging my tunic, a horrifying instant where gravity threatened to claim us both. But the fabric tore, his grip failed, and he was gone. A single, ragged cry ripped through the wind as he plunged into the darkness towards the waiting fangs of rock below. Silence descended, broken only by the wind's receding moan. The wrench clanged onto the grating from my nerveless fingers. I stood, paralyzed, the horror of physical weight. Eventually, numbly, I descended the spiral stair, emerging into the fragile dawn. The storm had scoured the world clean, leaving behind bruised pastels in the sky, a terrible beauty. Down in the cove, amidst the jagged stones, lay Silas, shattered and inert. The incoming tide whispered around his boots, already beginning its patient reclamation. The truth of the night pressed down, immense and suffocating. A choice, stark and unavoidable. Returning to the tower's quiet hum, moving like a somnambulist, I keyed the radio. Cormorant Head Station. My voice was a stranger's, thin and distant, reporting an accident. They called it misadventure, a tragic casualty of the tempest. A desperate man dashed against the rocks while seeking refuge. Though official narrative sealed, clean and final. Only I carry the jagged edges of the real story, a hidden weight within the lighthouse's steady pulse. I remain Elias, keeper of the light at Cormorant Head. The sea and the gulls still offer their austere solace. Yet when the gales return, screaming around the stone, my gaze drifts inevitably to the tumultuous water below. For the greatest tempests are not always born of wind and wave. Sometimes they arrive clinging to the wreckage, with hunted eyes and nothing left to lose. The instant the ghost image danced across the monitor's phosphorescent glow, I felt the familiar humdrum rhythm of my night shatter. In the shadowed realm of digital fortresses, hyper-awareness is merely baseline function, yet no amount of ingrained suspicion could truly steel me for the night that suspicion bloomed into stark, cold reality, pitching me headlong into a lethal ballet with predators intent on plundering the secrets I guarded. For 3 years, Elias Thorne has been the nocturnal sentinel of Cipher Core vaults. Not a career path paved with glory, true, but the compensation was fair, and the usual adversaries were pixelated card stacks and the tepid dregs of machine-brewed coffee. CCV exists in that peculiar strata of invisibility, known only to entities whose tendrils reach into the bedrock of global finance and governance. They curate silence, securing digital whispers that, if unleashed, could unravel markets or ignite conflicts. Hence the fortress, dermal scanners, daytime patrols armed to the teeth, and the intricate web of surveillance I command during the graveyard watch. Most nights, the deepest horror was a stray rodent streaking across the asphalt expanse outside. Tonight proved different. The shift began as countless others had. 11 post-meridian, the handover ritual, with the evening watch complete, sinking into the command chair's worn embrace. Before me, the wall of screens pulsed, a multifaceted eye gazing upon deserted parking acres, sterile corridors, humming server sanctums, even the wind-scoured roof. First system sweep concluded, I coaxed coffee from the machine, bracing for the slow crawl towards dawn. Then, around the second hour past midnight, a flicker snagged my periphery, a phantom shape gliding across an exterior feed, too deliberate for shifting shadows or wind-blown debris. I leaned closer, my gaze sweeping the grid. There, again. a silhouette clad in absolute black, melting between parked vehicles in the employee lot. A primitive drum began to beat against my ribs. This deviated sharply from the norm. Zooming the lens, straining for detail, revealed only the dark attire, the face lost behind a mask. And company. At least 3 others materialized, moving with a chilling synchronicity that bespoke rigorous training. Professionals. My hand reached for the console phone, the direct line, then paused. A false alarm here wasn't just embarrassing, it was career suicide. Certainty was paramount. I toggled to the internal feeds, breath catching in my throat as I focused on the primary entrance. A protracted stillness held sway. Then, almost imperceptibly, the access panel's indicator light bled from crimson to viridian. The reinforced door sighed open, and the shadows poured inside. Ice water sluiced through my veins. Not opportunistic thieves, these figures had circumvented protocols designed to be inviolable. This was seismic. My fingers, suddenly numb and clumsy, fumbled for the emergency line. "Cipher Core vaults," I managed, the words tight as the dispatcher connected. "Intrusion active. Multiple hostiles. Assume armed. Require maximum response." Assurances came, help was en route, but the facility's isolation was a cruel fact. 20 minutes, minimum, from the nearest precinct. Until then, I was the sole variable. Riveted to the monitors, I tracked their ingress. They moved with unnerving familiarity, their path efficient, purposeful. The suspicion solidified, an inside compromise. Their vector was unmistakable. The central server vault, CCV's pulsating heart, repository of the most volatile data. A crossroads loomed. Procedure dictated passive observation, awaiting cavalry. But a primal scream tore through my training. If they breached that vault, the game was already lost. Action was imperative. Drawing a ragged breath, I navigated the security mainframe overlay on my terminal. The ultimate failsafe. Total facility lockdown. Every portal sealed. Every lift shaft frozen. It would cage them. It would also cage me. My index finger trembled above the activation icon. This transcended my pay scale, my designation. I was a guardian, not a gladiator. But then, the monitors showed them reaching the vault's threshold. Time evaporated. I slammed the button. Klaxons erupted, their electronic shrieks tearing through the building's silence as heavy Durasteel blast doors thundered down, sealing every aperture. On screen, the intruders froze, their fluid motion arrested, before rapidly reconfiguring. Professionals indeed. Contingency was clearly part of their playbook. The true contest commenced. I had contained them, yes, but I had also locked myself into the arena with them. And they knew, implicitly, that someone orchestrated this. Locating the control nexus would be their next objective. A strategy, however fragmented, was essential. The control room offered sanctuary, but not indefinitely against a determined assault. Parity had to be established. I extinguished the primary lighting grids, plunging the entire facility into profound darkness. They would possess night vision capabilities, undoubtedly, but navigating absolute black would impede them. Conversely, every camera feed offered me infrared clarity. I held the advantage of sight. I watched them regroup, communicating through compact gestures. 3 pressed on towards the server vault. 1 detached, vectoring towards my position. Sweat slicked my palms as I monitored his methodical advance, clearing rooms as he progressed. Time for the next gambit. Accessing the environmental systems, a few keystrokes unleashed the fire suppression sequence in the corridor, abutting the server vault. No combustion existed, but they couldn't know that. Dense clouds of CO2 billowed, instantly blinding even their enhanced vision. A grim flicker of satisfaction touched me as I observed the trio near the vault, recoil, choking, disoriented. The small triumph dissolved swiftly. The 4th operative now stood sentinel outside my bastion. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched him scrutinize the reinforced portal. Its very construction screamed, "Control Center." He murmured into his comms unit. On the other feeds, the remaining 3 altered course, converging on me. I had purchased moments, but my arsenal of tricks dwindled. The police had to be nearing. Hold on, just a little longer. Then I saw it, a compact-shaped device being affixed to the control room door. They intended to breach explosively. Panic, cold and sharp, surged. My gaze darted wildly, seeking any advantage, any tool. It snagged on the ventilation grate low on the far wall. Small, but so was I. Thought surrendered to instinct. I wrenched the grate free, the metal groaning softly, and forced myself into the tight, dusty aperture. The grate was barely back in place when the muffled concussion of the blast vibrated through the ductwork. Through the narrow slats, I witnessed the intruders swarm the now compromised control room. Their raw frustration was almost tangible as they confronted empty space. Their prey had vanished. Yet safety remained elusive. I was entombed within the building's metallic entrails, hunted by 4 armed men, the arrival of rescue an unknown quantity. Crawling commenced, my mind racing to reconstruct the building's labyrinthine schematics. The loading dock, an emergency egress point, functional even under lockdown protocol. A desperate hope, but my only one. The ventilation shaft became a suffocating maze of sharp turns and echoing junctions. Each scuff of my passage felt deafeningly loud. The sounds of the search party resonated through the metal conduits, sometimes chillingly proximate. After an eternity compressed into minutes, a faint luminescence beckoned, the grate overlooking the loading bay. Almost there, but as I neared it, voices drifted up from directly below. 2 of them sweeping the area. I was pinned. Just as the tendrils of despair began to coil, a new sound pierced the tense quiet. Sirens, wailing, growing louder, closer, the cavalry finally cresting the horizon. The ensuing moments dissolved into chaotic symphony. Urgent shouts, the sharp crackle of gunfire, the shattering percussion of glass. I remained immobile within the vent, a statue carved from fear, waiting for the storm to pass. At last, a new voice, crisp with authority, resonated through the space. "Police, facility secured. Exit with your hands visible." A wave of profound relief washed over me, buckling my knees within the cramped shaft. It was finished. We prevailed. The aftermath unfolded in a disorienting montage of official statements and tactical debriefings. The intruders, apprehended, the invaluable data untouched, my actions lauded, commendations a substantial bonus. Yet, as the adrenaline tide receded, leaving the stark shoreline of reality exposed, a fundamental recalibration occurred within me. The presumed safety, the comforting monotony of my existence, illusions stripped bare. Cipher Core Vaults still claims my nights, but the texture of each shift is irrevocably altered. Every shadow flickering on a screen now carries potential menace. Each routine patrol harbors the possibility of the sinister. Some might find this perpetual state of high alert exhausting. For me, it serves as a constant touchstone, a reminder that the fragile membrane between stability and pandemonium, between security and catastrophe, can sometimes rest upon the shoulders of a single individual compelled to act when everything hangs in the balance. And so, I sit within my command center, eyes fixed on the glowing monitors, poised for whatever darkness the next hour might unveil. Because in this profession, paranoia isn't merely an occupational inconvenience, it's the very currency of survival. That room, the one Ilara always averted her eyes from, should have been my first clue. Her gaze slid past its frame as if the doorway itself were a blind spot in reality, a deliberate negation. Not once, during the 3 months I'd frequented her apartment before becoming her roommate, had she acknowledged its existence, let alone crossed its threshold. When I finally settled in last week, the question surfaced. "Storage," she'd murmured, a shrug lifting one shoulder dismissively. But storage implies contents, clutter, forgotten things. This room held only vacuum. The initial night passed uneventfully, swallowed by the quiet rhythm of a new place. The second yielded nothing more. Then came the third evening, and with it, the abrupt death of my phone mid-sentence during a crucial work discussion. Ilara slept the profound sleep of the untroubled, a state I was loath to disturb by rummaging for my misplaced charger. An image surfaced, an electrical outlet glimpsed earlier that day, stark against a bare wall within the shunned room, seen while shifting cardboard boxes. The door yielded without a whisper of protest, swinging inward on silent hinges. A chill immediately enveloped me, a palpable 10-degree drop from the relative warmth of the hallway. My phone's dying flashlight beam swept across unadorned plaster, finding no furniture, no sign of use, only the promised outlet on the far wall. Dust lay thick upon the wooden floorboards, a uniform grey blanket disturbed only by a precise circle in the room's heart, unnervingly clean, perhaps 3 feet in diameter. I knelt, plugged the phone into the wall socket, its screen flaring momentarily with the charging icon. Satisfied, I left it resting on the dusty floor and retreated. 3 a.m. wrenched me from sleep with the bladder's urgent demand. The path to the bathroom led directly past that door. Darkness reigned in the hallway, save for a strange, pulsing luminescence bleeding from beneath the forbidden door. My phone screen? No, the cadence was wrong, erratic, like a failing signal. Then came the sound, a delicate, unnervingly slow tapping from within. Tap, 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 like fingernails drumming patiently on old wood. Barefoot in my boxers, I stood rooted, the floorboards cold against my skin. The tapping ceased. A susurrus seeped through the crack beneath the door. Not quite words, but the shape of speech, muffled as if filtered through layers of cloth. My throat constricted. Work waited in the morning. The phone was non-negotiable. The whispering persisted, an undulating tide of sound, rising and falling. My hand closed around the doorknob. The metal was glacial. As I turned it, the whispering cut off with surgical precision. I pushed the door inward. My phone lay inert where I'd left it, screen black, the charging indicator pulsing a steady, rhythmic green. The room yawned, vacant, but the dust-free circle at its center had expanded, now easily 4 feet across. A tremor took hold of my hands as I snatched the phone, yanking the charger cord from the wall with clumsy haste. I almost fumbled the device. A dash to the bathroom, then a scurry back to the perceived safety of the bedroom. Ilara hadn't moved. I lay rigid until the grey light of dawn, straining my ears against the silence. The following day, blurred, concentration shattered by sleeplessness, neck muscles knotted tight. Over a solitary lunch, I texted Ilara, "Hey, what's the real story with the empty room? Old tenant clear out or something?" An hour crawled by before her reply appeared. "Don't really use it. Better that way." Better that way? The phrase coiled unpleasantly in my gut. My subsequent call went straight to her voicemail. That evening, Ilara worked late. I picked at delivery pizza on the sofa, forcing my gaze away from the hallway's shadowed maw. Around 10, the familiar scrape of her key sounded in the lock, but preceding her entrance, overlaying the mundane sound, came the other noise. Tap, 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 emanating unmistakably from the empty room. The instant Ilara stepped inside, looking drained, the tapping vanished. She offered a fleeting kiss to my cheek and moved towards the bathroom. I followed. "Ilara, that room. We need to discuss it." The shower hissed to life. "What about it?" Her voice was muffled by the spray. "I heard things, last night, and just now, before you came in." A beat of silence, punctuated by drumming water. "You went inside?" "To charge my phone, yeah, that's irrelevant. There's something—" "Don't!" She cut in sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Don't charge things in there. Just stay out of it, Leo, okay?" She disappeared behind the shower curtain before I could form a response. Later, cocooned in bed beside Ilara's steady breathing, I watched the digital clocks glow. 2:47 a.m., and the whispers began anew, insidious tendrils of sound weaving through the quiet. Ilara slept on, oblivious. How? The whispers intensified, coalescing, almost resolving into discernible words, hovering just beyond comprehension. At precisely 3 a.m., a heavy thud reverberated from the room, the sound of dead weight hitting the floor. Ilara sat bolt upright, eyes wide in the dimness. "Did you hear that?" "Yes," I breathed, her hand clamping onto my arm, fingers trembling. "Don't go look," she pleaded, her voice thin with fear. "Leo, please." Another thud followed, then a third, dragging and impossibly heavy. Footsteps, yet distinctly inhuman. The entire apartment seemed to hum with a low vibration. "What the hell is happening?" I flung back the covers. "Leo, no!" Ilara lunged, trying to hold me back, but I twisted free. The moment my feet hit the hallway floor, the thudding stopped. The door to the room remained closed, but now an unnatural blue light pulsed around its edges, flickering like corrupted data on a screen. The whispers had deepened into a low, continuous moan. I reached for the knob. Behind me, Ilara screamed, "No!" It was too late. The door swung open. Emptiness was no longer its defining characteristic. The clean circle in the dust had consumed the entire floor space, leaving no trace of the previous grime. And in the center stood a figure, impossibly tall, skeletally thin, its proportions grotesquely elongated, its head grazing the ceiling. It possessed no face, only smooth, pallid skin stretched taut over a vaguely skull-like structure beneath. Arms like starved branches hung past its knees, fingers trailing languidly on the dustless floor. The eerie blue light rippled across its surface, fluid and unstable. As I stood paralyzed, it began a slow, deliberate turn of its head towards me. Where eyes should have been, there were only profound, lightless hollows. I slammed the door shut, the sound cracking through the apartment, and ran. Ilara was already scrambling for her keys, her phone. We fled into the night, ending up parked outside a fluorescent-lit 24-hour diner, the car's interior a fragile bubble against the dark. "How long?" My voice was raw as the first hints of dawn stained the sky. "How long has it been in there?" Ilara stared fixedly through the windshield. "Since I moved in, 2 years back, the landlord, he said the room was part of the deal, non-negotiable, couldn't paint it, couldn't alter it." A brittle laugh escaped her. "The rent was obscenely low. Now I understand the discount." "Why didn't you warn me?" The accusation hung heavy between us. "Would you have listened? Honestly, Leo, would you have moved in if I'd told you my spare room housed that?" Silence answered her. We both knew the truth. "It never emerged before," she continued, her voice flat. "It stayed put until you introduced electronics, that charging phone. It must have fed it somehow, drawn it out. I don't know." That morning, we drove to her parents' house. Movers were summoned, instructed to retrieve our belongings, everything except the contents, or lack thereof, of that room. Ilara broke the lease, forfeiting the security deposit without a second thought. Our new place costs significantly more, but each room feels blessedly mundane, usable. Yet the quiet hours retain echoes, not actual sounds, but memory ghosts. Tap, tap, tap. I find myself pondering that vacant space, wondering who occupies that apartment now, whether they've felt the chill, or perhaps needed to charge a dying phone. Ilara refuses to speak of it. The old lease, bearing the address we try not to recall, vanished into the trash. But last week, I saw her hastily delete a text message from her former landlord, an unknown number. Just 4 words lingered on the screen before vanishing. "The room misses you." I purged my contact details from the moving company's records, switched email providers, ported my number to a new carrier. No loose ends, because sometimes, very late, my phone screen will flicker with that familiar, sickly blue light. In those moments, the whispers resurface, swelling just beneath the threshold of hearing, almost intelligible. But comprehension is the last thing I want. Some doors are meant to remain shut, some rooms deserve their emptiness, and some messages demand only silence, regardless of their persistence. Last night, my new phone died without warning. One moment, a full charge, the next, absolute blackness. In the profound dark of our new bedroom, I heard it, faint, terrifyingly distinct. Tap, tap, tap. This morning, I disposed of the phone. Ilara watched me, her expression unreadable. She simply nodded and produced a cheap, antiquated flip phone she'd acquired weeks prior. No GPS, no internet, no apps. Harder for things to track, she stated quietly. Harder for what to track? The question formed but died unspoken. I knew. That room wasn't merely a room. It was a threshold, and the thing that crossed it is still searching. Now, nightly rituals include checking closets, peering behind shower curtains, glancing beneath the bed. Logic screams paranoia. Then the image returns. Those vacant hollows, the skin like stretched parchment, the elongated fingers brushing the floor. Ilara sleeps bathed in the glow of a nightlight. I don't question it. Neither of us acknowledges the unnerving blank spot in our memories, where the old apartment number and street name should reside. It's as if those mundane details were deliberately excised, leaving only the searing imprint of the room, the figure, the blue light. Occasionally, I jolt awake at 3 a.m., body rigid, convinced the whispers emanate from our new closet. They never do, just phantom reverberations. We are safe, I tell myself. We moved far, covered our tracks, severed the connections. But yesterday, tucked inside our new mailbox, was a small, plain slip of paper. Blank, except for a single perfect circle, meticulously drawn in what looked like fine grey dust. I incinerated it instantly, telling Ilara nothing. That night, however, lying side by side in the tense silence of feigned sleep, I heard her whisper, so low it was almost consumed by the dark. It knows where we are. I offered no sign of having heard. I pretended not to notice her rise later to recheck every lock, every window latch. Pretended not to see her delete another text from an unknown sender. But her certainty resonates within me. Because this morning, catching my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I glimpsed something over my shoulder, for less than a heartbeat. A tall, attenuated shadow, faceless, observing. I didn't turn. Sometimes, refusing to look is the only defense left. We are moving again next week. No forwarding address, no smart devices, no digital footprints. We understand now. In this hyper-connected world, certain disconnections are vital for survival. Some doors must remain bolted. Some rooms must remain inviolate. But as I lie awake, listening to the hum of the city, I wonder if distance matters, if any place is truly beyond its reach. Because in the liminal space between wakefulness and sleep, the sound persists, a patient, rhythmic counterpoint to my own frantic pulse. Tap, 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 and it feels closer than ever before. The vitrine's surface yielded like cool mist beneath my touch, a shiver tracing constellations down my spine. I snatched my hand back, pulse a frantic drum against my ribs, confronting my own image. It remained placid, an impassive duplicate, betraying nothing of the impossible threshold I'd just breached. Yet the sensation lingered, cold, electric. This looking glass, nestled in the shadowed eaves of my grandmother Evelyn's house, was no mere reflector. It was a doorway. Evelyn Thorne's residence had always hummed with an undercurrent of the extraordinary. Summers spent within its labyrinthine Victorian embrace were exercises in exploration, charting creaking stairwells, uncovering hidden alcoves crammed with relics from her global peregrinations. An archaeologist by trade, a collector of enigmas by nature, she'd filled the house with curiosities, but the attic remained sacrosanct, a locked mystery. When the time is right, Ilara, she'd deflect my childhood pleas, her eyes holding distant horizons. Now at 25, adrift after academia, I'd returned to sift through the remnants of her life, her recent passing a quiet finality. The attic key, intricate and cold, felt momentous in my pocket as I ascended the narrow steps, my flashlight beam cutting through a nebula of disturbed dust. I'd braced myself for forgotten treasures, perhaps leather-bound journals chronicling desert digs or jungle expeditions. What greeted me instead was a disorienting gallery of captured light. Mirrors. They leaned against steamer trunks, hung suspended from rafters like frozen portals, crowded the walls. A congregation of reflections in frames ranging from Baroque extravagance to austere simplicity. Yet one commanded the space, taller than I, framed in serpentine coils of argent metal that seemed to drink the dimness and exhale a faint luminescence. It stood sentinel. Approaching, my reflection warped, undulating as if submerged in deep water. Captivated, I extended a finger, tracing the strange frame, then tentatively touched the glass. It offered no resistance. My fingertip vanished into its surface as if into smoke. Recoiling, mind scrambling for purchase on reality, I stood rooted. Hallucination? Some elaborate trick acquired on Evelyn's travels? Or something infinitely stranger, whispered about only in forgotten folklore? Logic offered no solace. There was only the pull of the unknown. Gathering a breath that felt thin and inadequate, I committed. A moment of pressure, a yielding tension like pushing through cool gelatin, and then the abrupt, shocking immersion of stepping into frigid water. I was through. I stood in a woodland utterly alien. Trees like titanic pillars of amethyst soared towards an unseen canopy, their foliage shimmering with internal light. The air, thick and cloyingly sweet, carried luminous spores drifting like sentient embers. Behind me, the mirror hung, a stark rectangle of displaced reality amidst the phantasmal flora. Gods, I breathed, turning slowly, overwhelmed. Evelyn, what was this? A susurrus in the iridescent undergrowth answered, the distinct sound of movement. Something substantial approached, panic flared, a primal urge to retreat, to scramble back through the shimmering gateway. But before I could react, a figure emerged from between the violet bowls. It possessed a humanoid grace, but was distinctly other, impossibly slender, its skin shimmering like oiled nacre, its eyes vast pools swirling with captured starlight. It observed me with an unnerving, profound curiosity. Greetings? The words felt absurdly small, brittle in the strange air. I mean no harm. The entity inclined its head. Sound bloomed, not from a mouth, but as a complex resonance within my own skull, musical tones coalescing into comprehensible thought. Welcome, initiate. Long has it been since your kind traversed the shimmering path. My kind? My voice trembled. Humans? Did my grandmother come here? The nebulae in its eyes spun faster. The first voyager? Aye. She walked this realm many cycles past. She sought understanding and shared much. My world tilted. Evelyn, here, in this impossible dimension, how often? What had she learned? I can't grasp this, I stammered. What is this place? How could she? This is but one strand in the great tapestry, the being conveyed. Your elder one found a crossing by fortune, as humans occasionally do. Yet she returned deliberately, time and again, pursuing knowledge woven between worlds. My gaze snapped back to the mirror, understanding dawning like a cold sun. The mirrors, in the attic, they're all thresholds, aren't they, to different realities? A sound like crystalline wind chimes resonated. Affirmation. The partitions between realities wear thin in places. Your species senses these junctures, weaving mythologies around them. Few possess the clarity to perceive, fewer still the will to step across. I pictured the attic, crowded with portals. How many worlds had Evelyn charted? What marvels, what terrors had she witnessed? Can you show me? The question escaped, a fusion of raw fear and burgeoning excitement. Can you help me understand what she learned? The being regarded me, its swirling eyes seeming to plumb depths within me I hadn't known existed. Then it extended a limb, elongated, subtly webbed, yet undeniably a hand. Come, it sang into my mind. There is much to witness. What ensued was not merely travel, but a dissolution of perceived reality. We moved through mirror after mirror, each threshold opening onto vistas that defied terrestrial logic. I witnessed cities clinging like lichen to vertical escarpments in a realm where gravity pulled sideways, walked streets where inhabitants lived their lives in reverse, events unreeling towards their genesis. There were oceans of sentient quicksilver, forests of crystalline flora that sang complex harmonies on unfelt winds, deserts where microscopic automata endlessly rebuilt dunes of shimmering data. In every realm, sentient life existed, some echoing human form, others gloriously, terrifyingly abstract, yet all recognized the concept of humans, the rare voyagers who crossed the veil, and universally they spoke of my grandmother, Evelyn Thorne, with reverence. The first voyager brought illumination, pulsed a creature of living magma beside a volcanic spire. She gifted us concepts of your sciences, your artistic expressions. She learned the deep songs, trilled an entity composed of pure sound waves in a dimension of endless music, and left echoes of her own melodies among us. Everywhere, evidence of exchange. Terran artifacts enshrined in alien archives, human philosophical concepts woven into cosmic dialogues. Evelyn hadn't just observed, she had engaged, learned, and brought back wisdom that dwarfed earthly understanding. My guide, whom I came to know through its resonant signature as Xylar, imparted the rudiments of veil walking, how to sense the subtle frequencies of the thresholds, to navigate the interstitial pathways connecting the mirrors. It was intoxicating, terrifying, a constant recalibration of the senses. Your elder possessed a rare resonance, Xylar conveyed as we rested in a meadow where the grass pulsed with soft bioluminescence. She perceived the connective threads binding all realities, a faculty few humans cultivate. I plucked a luminous blade, watching its gentle throb against my palm. Do I have it? This resonance? Xylar's nebula eyes swirled, considering. The potential hums within you, but it demands cultivation, focus, your elder dedicated lifetimes, by your measure, to honing this perception. My former life, degree, career prospects, familiar faces, felt like a faded photograph from another existence, utterly insignificant against this staggering panorama. I want to learn, I declared, the conviction solidifying within me. I need to see it all, to comprehend. Xylar emitted the chime-like resonance. It is a formidable path. To walk between worlds is to be irrevocably altered. You will encounter truths that shatter belief, face perils beyond mortal conception. I nodded, fear and exhilaration warring in my gut. I understand, but I have to, for Evelyn, if nothing else. So be it, Xylar sang. Let your true apprenticeship commence, initiate. We journeyed for what felt like an eternity compressed into moments, time itself fluid and unreliable between the realms. Xylar instructed me in the nuanced languages of the Veil, the paradoxical mathematics governing transdimensional transit, the sprawling, interwoven history of the multiverse. I learned of the confluence of spheres, an inter-realm council Evelyn had been instrumental in establishing. I encountered other Veil Walkers, diverse beings from myriad origins, confirming our rarity. And always, the stories of Evelyn, mediating disputes between starfaring civilizations, introducing revolutionary paradigms, forever pushing the boundaries of the possible. She wasn't merely an archaeologist, she was an architect of interdimensional understanding. As my awareness expanded under Xylar's tutelage, I felt the profound change taking root. Reality itself became mutable, porous. I could feel the subtle tides of energy flowing between worlds, perceive the gossamer filaments linking disparate existences. With this heightened perception came a crushing weight of responsibility. Evelyn hadn't just explored, she had become integral to this cosmic web. Now her unfinished tapestry seemed to fall to me. Eventually, after an unmeasurable duration, Xylar led me back to the amethyst forest, back to the incongruous mirror reflecting the alien foliage. Yamum, you have absorbed much, initiate, Xylar resonated. Yet this is merely the first step upon an unending path. The way of the Veil Walker is perpetual discovery, perpetual challenge. I nodded, drained yet vibrantly alive. What now? Now you choose. Xylar gestured towards the shimmering portal. Return to your origin world, bearing the knowledge you have gained, or embrace this path fully, become what your elder was, a true walker between worlds. I stared into the mirror. My own face looked back, but superimposed upon it, like ghosts, were the myriad realities I'd glimpsed. I saw the threads, the infinite connections, the sheer, staggering scale of existence. The life I'd left behind felt impossibly distant, a cradle I'd outgrown. There was no real choice. I'm staying, I said, turning to face Xylar, the decision settling deep within my bones. There's too much left. Evelyn's work, our work, isn't done. Xylar's eyes swirled with a light I now recognized as profound approval. Then let us proceed, Veil Walker. The multiverse unfolds. As we turned from the mirror, stepping deeper into the luminous alien woods, a sense of purpose unlike anything I'd ever known surged through me. Evelyn Thorne had bequeathed me far more than a house filled with cryptic artifacts. She had left a legacy etched across realities, a mission woven into the fabric of existence itself, and I was ready to claim it. Whatever wonders, whatever dangers, awaited on the shimmering path. "2 a.m. wrenched me from sleep, a hammer pounding behind my eyes, forged from stale air breathed too long and the low threnody of ancient wiring. Solitude is my choice, enshrined within this derelict concrete shell. Its walls bear fissures like old scars. The floors list beneath my feet. Doorways bleed faded paint in chipped ribbons. The corridors offer no solace, only skeletal wiring, exposed plumbing, and the baleful glare of cheap fixtures. I sought silence here, a refuge from the friction of human contact. I keep my own counsel, no one prize. Most dwellings stand vacant. The scattered inhabitants drift past like smoke, mute, which suits me. My windows, 3rd floor, stare into a cramped alley, choked with skeletal furniture and the rust-wept sides of overflowing bins. Its miasma slithers upward whenever glass meets air, so the sash remains sealed. Tonight, the weight inside my apartment felt heavier, the air thick as silt. A need for clean air, or perhaps just escape, pulled me towards the roof. Occasional knocks shuddered through the hot water pipes. A persistent low buzz emanated from the kitchen's fluorescent tube. Clad in worn sweatpants and a meager jacket, I shoved my feet into shoes. The hinges protested as I slipped into the hall's embrace. Darkness reigned. Near the stairwell, a single light spasmed, throwing epileptic shadows. The air tasted of mold and decay. Muffled, distorted sounds. A television murmuring through plaster leaked from somewhere distant. My own footfalls were loud intrusions. I ascended the concrete flights, each step echoing until I reached the uppermost landing and shoved against the heavy metal door, barring the way to the terrace. Emptiness greeted me. Below, the city shimmered, a faint, sprawling incandescence. Scattered rooftops formed a jagged silhouette against a sky clotted with clouds that swallowed the stars. A low parapet traced the roof's perimeter. Discarded metal chairs lay in a tangled heap to one side, near a constellation of empty beer bottles. I drew a breath, then released it. The air, cooler than inside, carried a damp kiss. Drawn to the edge, I leaned out, peering into the familiar abyss of the alley. Nothing stirred below the usual detritus. Silence held sway. Turning to retreat, my eyes snagged on it. Perched upon the parapet, something crouched. Humanoid in scale, perhaps marginally shorter, its skin held a grayish pallor, dry and strangely textured, like old parchment. It hunched low, balanced on its hands. Hands that were wrong, the digits elongated, bent, knuckles jutting at unnatural angles. It fixed its gaze upon me. The eyes were narrow slits, voids devoid of color, simply dark apertures boring into me. A cold clench seized my shoulders, my gut twisting into a knot. Breath snagged in my throat. A faint rise and fall stirred its chest. Slow, deliberate respiration. No sound escaped it. Not a whisper, not a sigh. I recoiled a step, my back striking the rusted metal flank of an old ventilation shaft. The tang of oxidation filled my nostrils. Paralysis held me. What action could I take? The creature remained utterly still, an obsidian gaze locked on mine. My thoughts darted to the door, the sanctuary beyond it. When my gaze snapped back to the parapet, the space was vacant. It hadn't moved, it had simply ceased to be there. One moment present, the next, absence. The parapet stood empty. The derelict chairs and bottles lay undisturbed. Tentatively, I approached the edge again, leaning far over, scanning the depths. Only the shadowed alley, the slick, damp concrete below. I swept my gaze across the rooftop, barren, as if dissolved into the night air. My heart hammered against my ribs. Sweat prickled my skin. A wave of foolishness washed over me, standing alone on the desolate roof. Yet the certainty remained. I had seen it. The phantom pressure of its stare lingered. The roof suddenly felt too exposed. I turned, hurrying back towards the heavy door, plunging down the stairs. The air on the top floor corridor felt unnaturally chill, the lights dimmer than memory served. My descent was rapid, my feet finding the steps almost without thought until I reached my own door. Inside, I threw the lock, the deadbolt sliding home with a decisive thud. Windows checked, secured. Every light switch flicked on, bathing the small space in the humming, buzzing glow of cheap electricity. I stood, catching my breath, listening acutely for any aberration in the building's usual groans. Silence at first. In the bathroom, I splashed water on my face. It ran ochre initially, then cleared. My reflection showed exhaustion, eyes webbed with red. A faint tremor danced in my hands. The image of that gray entity, burned onto my retinas, refused to fade. Humanoid, yet profoundly not. What was it? Stepping back into the living area, I tried to anchor myself. Read, watched television, but focus shattered, my mind relentlessly replaying the rooftop encounter. Then, a sound began within the walls. Faint at first, like metal dragged across metal, the hesitant scrape of a loose pipe settling. I tracked it to a corner. It migrated, now overhead, skittering along the path of the ceiling pipes before falling silent. I stood rigid, listening. A minute stretched. Nothing. Just the old building settling, I told myself. Old bones creaking. Then the lights faltered. The kitchen fluorescent buzzed, dimmed perilously, then flared back. The lamp beside me mirrored the disturbance. I craned my neck, scanning the room. It seemed constricted, smaller. Why? Everything occupied its usual space. The threadbare couch, the scarred coffee table, the television perched on its flimsy stand, the vacant shelves. Yet a palpable pressure pushed inwards, as if the very walls were leaning closer. Forcing composure, I sank onto the couch, concentrating on steadying my breath. An hour bled away. The television mumbled on low volume, some forgotten late-night program flickering unnoticed. Another stutter from the lights. Then, a sharp pop resonated from the hallway just outside my door. A quick, brittle snap, like thin metal yielding. Rising, I pressed my ear to the door panel. A whisper? The ghost of breath? Indiscernible. I eased the lock open, cracked the door. The corridor lay steeped in gloom. The far light gave another weak flicker. Nothing else moved. I closed the door softly. Turning back into the room, a prickling sensation crawled up my neck. The undeniable feeling of presence, of not being alone. The apartment's silence now felt dense, watchful. In the kitchen, I rummaged in a drawer, my fingers closing around the reassuring heft of a heavy screwdriver. What defense it offered, I couldn't say, but its solidity was a comfort. I drifted to the window. Through the grimy pane, the alley lay shadowed, a sliver of the adjacent building visible. My own reflection stared back, weary but ordinary. Then, behind me in the glass, a shape shifted. Low, swift movement near the floor. I spun, screwdriver raised defensively. Nothing. Just the couch, the empty shelves. My heart resumed its frantic rhythm. I searched, behind the couch, beneath the table, pulling open the coat closet door. Empty. My mouth felt like dust. I reached for bottled water, but the taste was metallic. Wrong. I spat it into the sink. The pipe beneath shuddered, rattling. Peering into the cabinet, I saw the old, corroded plumbing. A single droplet swelled on a joint, detached, and struck the cabinet floor with a dull tap. Extinguishing all but one lamp by the couch, I attempted sleep. Curled in a corner of the sofa, wrapped in a thin blanket, facing the door. Futile. Each time my eyelids drooped, the gray figure materialized behind them, those dark slits fixed upon me. Eyes snapping open, I stared at the door, marking the sluggish crawl of minutes. Faint tapping resumed within the walls. Ignore it. I must have drifted, sleep ambushing me, because a sudden jolt brought me back. The lamp flickered erratically. My watch showed nearly 4 a.m. The tapping was louder now, insistent. A definite sense of movement within the pipes, something navigating the building's hidden arteries. I stood, moving into my small entryway. The door remained securely locked. Outside, the hallway appeared unchanged, merely dim. Screwdriver still clutched. I stepped out. The air struck cold against my skin. The floor felt subtly tilted beneath my feet. Slowly, cautiously, I advanced along the corridor, listening. A metallic scraping emanated from the far end, near the stairwell. As I drew closer, step by hesitant step, the sound ceased. I peered down the stairwell's gullet. Darkness swallowed the lower floors. The building's chronic dimness seemed amplified tonight. The scent of damp concrete and settled dust thickened the air. My hand closed on the railing. Its surface felt rough, frigid. Then, a noise directly overhead. I looked up. A light fixture, floors above, flickered violently, buzzed, then died. Retreat, no more wandering. I turned back towards my apartment, but the corridor seemed to stretch before me. Elongated. I didn't remember this distance. My door, visible, felt impossibly far. My pace quickened, footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. Reaching it at last, breathless, I scrambled inside. Back within my 4 walls, dizziness swept over me. I sat on the couch, head cradled in my hands, listening to the ragged sound of my own breathing. The presence lingered, an invisible weight. Eyes open, I switched the television back on. Low volume, needing the distraction. Static snowed across the screen momentarily before resolving into an old rerun. Canned laughter echoed, sounding hollow, distant. Calm down. Think. Leave the building? Where would I go at this hour? The thought of the streets outside, especially now, repelled me. A compromise. Check the main entrance. Perhaps the lobby, the threshold to the outside world, would offer some perspective. Keys in hand, I ventured out again. Descending the stairs, I noticed the overhead pipes. They vibrated gently, an irregular rattling, like something tapping rhythmically from within. I fought the image of what might reside inside those metal conduits. Reaching the lobby, small, cramped, lit by a single flickering bulb above the glass front door, I peered out. The street lay deserted, save for parked cars and a stray cat investigating a dumpster. Mundane normalcy. I stood by the door, the urge to flee warring with inertia. Then I registered my appearance. Old sweats, thin jacket, no wallet, no phone. Just keys and the screwdriver heavy in my pocket. Hesitation anchored me. Was I prepared to wander the pre-dawn city looking like a fugitive? Turning, I faced the corridor leading back to the stairs. For a disorienting instant, it seemed to warp, bending slightly away from true. I blinked hard. Normal again. Just the building, playing tricks on tired eyes. Back to the apartment. Wait for daylight. Surely daylight would dispel this wrongness. Climbing again, the scraping within the pipes intensified, accompanied now by a faint odor like burnt dust. My gaze traced the walls. The paint, fissured and peeling, seemed to harbor new small stains I hadn't noticed before. Floor by floor, I ascended. Reaching my level, the hallway lights performed their stuttering dance. I walked towards my door, shut tight. Unlocking it, I stepped inside. Quiet. I secured the door, engaging the chain lock this time. Another sweep. Bathroom, closet, under the bed frame, behind the couch. Empty. I cracked the window just an inch. A faint breeze entered, carrying the alley's signature rot. I slammed it shut again. I slid down against the wall, sitting on the floor, facing the door. Screwdriver gripped tight. Every muscle remained coiled, tense. Relaxation felt impossible. Listening. The pipes groaned softly, then fell silent. The low hum of the lights persisted. Outside, the distant wail of a siren rose and faded, leaving deeper silence. Sweat beaded on my forehead. I rubbed my stinging eyes. Another hour crawled past, closer to 5 a.m. Perhaps the sky would begin to lighten soon. Rising, I went to the window. Still dark, only the faint orange glow of streetlights reflecting off low clouds. No hint of dawn. I returned to the door, listening intently. The hallway outside seemed quiescent now. I eased the door open a fraction. It looked normal. Stepping out, a familiar tightness constricted my chest. The light overhead flickered. My gaze traveled to the end of the hall. A shape coalesced in the dimness, vague, indistinct, like a deeper shadow detaching itself from the others. I strained to see, and it vanished. My heart hammered anew. I retreated inside, locking the door, leaning against it, breathing slowly through my nose. My head ached fiercely. Back on the couch, I switched off the television. Silence felt preferable now. I listened to the rhythm of my own breathing. My knuckles were white where they gripped the screwdriver handle. An ache bloomed between my shoulder blades from sustained tension. My mouth was parched. I drank water straight from the tap. Stale, but the metallic tang was gone. I swallowed slowly. The hours stretched, thin and brittle. Around 6, the first grudging suggestion of daylight filtered through the dirty window pane. The building's nocturnal noises subsided. The pipes settled into their usual distant ticks and groans. The lights burned steady. When I risked checking the hallway again, it held its proper dimensions. Nothing lurked in the shadows. I sat by the window, watching the alley gradually resolve into clearer lines, the shapes of bins and broken chairs emerging from the gloom. The sky remained a uniform, dull gray. Safety felt distant, but the suffocating sense of entrapment eased slightly. What transpired last night? The rooftop encounter felt undeniable. the building's subsequent strangeness, equally real. But now, in the flat light of early morning, a weary quiet prevailed. I stood, stretching stiff limbs. Unease remained, a low hum beneath the surface, the feeling that something could reappear without warning. But I pushed it down. Perhaps it wouldn't return. Perhaps the day could be navigated. I made instant coffee. It tasted foul, but the warmth was grounding. The ritual, something concrete to perform. I walked the perimeter of my apartment again, room by room. In the morning light, everything looked depressingly normal. One last check, the roof. A compulsion I couldn't resist, though reluctance warred with the need to know. The stairwell air hung thick with old dust. The terrace door groaned open, empty. The chairs, the bottles, lay undisturbed. The parapet stood solid, unblemished. Leaning over the edge, I surveyed the waking city. Distant traffic murmurs, the slam of a faraway door. No trace of the gray figure. I stood for a minute, arms crossed against the cool morning air, washing over my face. Then turning back, I descended. My hand on the railing felt steady now. Reaching my floor, the hallway was just a hallway. Chipped paint, uneven floor. I unlocked my door, stepped inside. The apartment smelled of stale coffee and yesterday's air. Throwing the window wide, I let the morning in. Not fresh exactly, but lighter than the suffocating atmosphere of the night. I don't know what it was, the thing on the roof, why it appeared, or why the building itself seemed to twist in its wake. I know only the bone-deep exhaustion, the frayed edge of my nerves. I sit, trying to gather myself. I will endure the day. Stay here, remain quiet. Hope it was an aberration, a nightmare that bled into waking hours. I try not to picture the eyes without pupils, not to hear the memory of scraping inside the pipes. I just listen to the city stirring outside my open window and keep my gaze fixed on the doorway, waiting, just in case. Route 99 unspooled like a black ribbon through interminable pines, the night absolute beyond the twin beams gouging a path ahead. 3 hours swallowed by the drive, 5 promised until home after my cousin's nuptials, when the flicker appeared. An aged pickup listing onto the gravel verge, its hazard lights pulsing a faint, erratic heartbeat in the gloom. Instinct urged caution, the Samaritan reflex kicking in on this desolate artery. But as velocity bled away, a disquieting detail surfaced, phantoms coalescing in the headlight wash. Not one, but several large canines circling the derelict truck. Doors gaped wide, swallowing the darkness, yet no human form emerged. Only the dogs, their movements unnerving. Not the random explorations of strays, but a tight, almost ritualistic pacing. A perimeter. My foot hovered, easing pressure on the accelerator, maintaining just enough impetus for escape. Then, the beams swept wider, snagging on it, a silhouette detaching itself from the truck's deeper shadow. Human, undeniably, but furtive, hugging the metal flank, not soliciting aid, waiting. The dogs sensed my approach, heads snapping up, a unified motion. The restless patrol ceased. Now, stark in the glare, their posture shifted, coiled, expectant. These were no lost pets. These were sentinels awaiting command. A cold certainty clenched my gut. My knuckles whitened on the wheel. Impulse became action. The accelerator met the floor. The engine whined, protesting the sudden demand. Figures, canine, darted towards the asphalt ribbon, but the car surged forward, already past. A glance in the rearview mirror snatched a final image. The shadow stepping clear, an arm lifting. A wave? A threat? Impossible to discern before the truck and its unsettling tableau dissolved into the receding night. My heart hammered against my ribs. Fumbling for the phone nestled on the passenger seat, digits poised for emergency dispatch, I found only emptiness. No bars. Predictable, this stretch of 99, infamous for its digital void. The report would have to wait. Oak Haven, the next bastion of light and connection, lay miles ahead. 20 minutes stretched taut with adrenaline, finally snapping as the fluorescent embrace of an Oak Haven service station materialized. Hands still trembling, I relayed the encounter to the 911 operator, the mention of the dogs lending sharp credence to my words. Mine, it transpired, was not the first call painting such a picture. Trained animals, a desolate highway. While patrol cars vectored towards the coordinates I'd given, the station attendant, a woman named Agnes with eyes that had seen too many long nights, slid a steaming mug across the counter. "You trusted your gut. Smart," she murmured, her expression etched with concern. "Been a spate of incidents. Folks pull over, thinking breakdown, thinking help, and walk right into trouble." She elaborated on the pattern the local constabulary was piecing together. Vehicles staged like traps, doors invitingly ajar, the dogs, a calculated layer of intimidation, and unseen figures lying in wait for the well-intentioned. No serious injuries yet, she stressed, but the close calls were mounting. "The dogs, that's the newest wrinkle," Agnes added, topping off my coffee. "Plays on the heartstrings, see? Makes you pause, check if the driver's alone, gives them that crucial moment. They bank on that hesitation." My phone buzzed before the coffee cooled. Dispatch again. The pickup had vanished, leaving only disturbed gravel and tire tracks confirming recent stops. My description joined a thickening dossier. Agnes waved away my attempt to pay, pressing a small card into my hand instead. Safety protocols for lone travelers, courtesy of the sheriff's department. "Never stop after dark," she recited, tapping a line. "Call from safety. Trust that feeling in your stomach." Before releasing me back into the night, she ensured my tank was full, her station's number now logged in my contacts. "We're always lit, always here," she affirmed. "Anyone needs a hand, they call us. We get the right people rolling, or our own tow truck." The remaining miles home were traversed under a different awareness. The darkness felt deeper, each roadside anomaly scrutinized. Now, though, apprehension mingled with preparedness. Note the mile marker, maintain speed, find sanctuary, report. The next day, spurred by the near miss, I plunged into research. Roadside security, emergent predatory tactics. Online forums buzzed with similar accounts. The canine gambit, exploiting the impulse to rescue, was indeed gaining traction. Local news outlets caught the scent, framing the narrative not as fear-mongering, but as essential awareness. Agnes, interviewed, became an unlikely roadside sentinel, her service station formally designated a safe haven, joining a burgeoning network along Route 99. Patrol visibility increased. Animal control liaised with law enforcement, investigating the misuse of trained dogs. New signage punctuated the lonely stretches. Suspicious activity? Report it. And pointedly, do not stop for stranded vehicles. Use emergency services. A month elapsed. Driving that same ribbon of asphalt, I noted the changes. Squat, utilitarian emergency call boxes now stood sentinel at intervals. Agnes's station gleamed under fresh paint, a prominent shield proclaiming its safe stop location status. The highway breathed differently, less isolated, more watched. Stopping in, I found Agnes counseling the young motorist, map spread on the counter, dotted with verified refugees. "Know your safe zones," she instructed, her finger tracing the route. "Know who to reach, and listen, always listen, to that inner voice." The encounter hadn't extinguished compassion, but reshaped its expression. Helping, I now understood, demanded prudence. My phone hosted an emergency services application. My mental map highlighted sanctuaries along familiar journeys. True assistance sometimes meant driving on, reporting the potential danger to those equipped to intervene without becoming vulnerable themselves. Just last week, spotting a sedan with a shredded tire near my exit, the old impulse flickered. Instead, I drove a mile further, pulled safely off, and dialed the highway patrol. Their dedicated roadside unit responded, professionals trained for uncertainty, ensuring safety for all involved. Inheritance arrived not with ceremony, but with the scent of decay. My parents' house, a husk left vacant for years, held no promise of uncanny discoveries. My sole ambition was its resurrection and swift sale, a severing of ties. Yet, standing before it on a Friday morning, the air thick with neglect, unease began its subtle creep. Weeds choked the yard, a ragged tapestry interwoven with street-blown refuse. The key turned, the front door groaned open, releasing a plume of dust that rasped in my throat. Inside, time lay suspended beneath grimy shrouds covering familiar furniture. Ghosts of laughter and argument clung to the faded photographs on the walls, every surface filmed with the quiet sedimentation of abandonment. A chill, deeper than the house's trapped air, settled over me, dismissed as mere gloom, the natural consequence of confronting a place surrendered to entropy. My strategy began below ground. The cellar, a perennial source of subterranean woes during my youth, the fickle sump pump, my father's litany of complaints about encroaching damp, seemed the logical starting point. Check the foundation's integrity, then ascend. The basement door resisted, then yielded. I flicked the switch. Darkness held fast, the bulb defunct. My phone's beam sliced downwards into the stairwell, each descending tread protesty with a wooden sigh. At the bottom, my light skittered across water, ankle deep, stagnant, its surface an opaque, brackish mirror reflecting the feeble beam. The smell hit next, fetid, reminiscent of mildewed earth and laundry left to rot for weeks. A knot tightened in my gut. I swept the light around. Waterlogged shelves sagged, sodden cardboard boxes gaped open, disgorging rusted tools. A quiet, insistent trickling whispered against the concrete walls, the sound of water perpetually seeking egress. In a corner near the defunct pump, pipes vanished into the murky depths. Clearly, a more formidable pump was required before any repair could commence. Annoyance warred with a faint, unwelcome thrill, the primal urge to tame chaos, even this sodden, stinking version. A trip to the hardware emporium yielded a heavy-duty submersible pump, thick rubber gauntlets, and boots that reached my knees. Back within the house's stale embrace, I wrestled the equipment down the creaking stairs. Positioning the pump in a likely corner, I threaded its discharge hose through a grimy basement window, aiming its effluent onto the overgrown lawn. The plug met the socket. The pump hummed to life, a mechanical heartbeat in the aqueous silence, and began its steady draw. Relief washed over me as the water level, visibly, albeit slowly, began to recede. Then, perhaps 10 minutes into the operation, a different sound intruded. A low, muffled vibration, less heard than felt. My skin prickled. A reflexive glance over my shoulder revealed only damp walls and the shifting surface of the water. Nerves, I told myself. The gurgle of pipes, the pump's own laboring rhythm. But as more concrete emerged from the receding flood, the hum returned, clearer this time, disturbingly resonant, like a voice struggling through a dense medium. Words remained elusive, buried beneath the distortion. A faint ringing commenced in my ears, blurring the line between perception and paranoia. Moving closer to the pump intensified the sound, yet its source remained enigmatic. Then, unmistakably, woven into the garbled thrum, my name, low, distorted, yet certain. Silas. My heart hammered against my ribs. I killed the power. Silence crashed down, broken only by the frantic cadence of my own breathing and the slow gurgle of water draining back from the hose. My phone's light, now trembling, swept the oppressive space. Dripping from soaked ceiling joists echoed with unnatural loudness. The phone's battery indicator flashed low. The dead overhead bulb offered no solace. Retreat. Leave the pump silent for now. Return with illumination. Locking the house felt like sealing a tomb. The drive home was a battle against rising anxiety. Rationalizations about wind whistling through foundation cracks, feeling increasingly hollow. The following day, armed with a powerful torch, spare bulbs, and a new ceiling fixture, I returned. Installing the light was a fumbling process against damp wiring, but eventually a single stark bulb cast a weak circle of light onto the scene below. Discouragingly, the water had returned overnight, reclaiming its territory, the basement once more a shallow, stagnant pool. The pump sat half-submerged, a monument to futility. Frustration curdled into anger. How could it refill so quickly? My hand hovered over my phone, poised to call a plumber, but stubbornness won. I would drain it again. The pump whirred. The hose outside spat muddy water onto the beleaguered lawn. Again I watched the level drop. And again, after 10 minutes, the hum began. That same submerged, indistinct quality, pulsing in short, irregular bursts. My muscles locked, jaw clenched tight. Cold sweat beaded on my brow, despite the cellar's clammy chill. The sound sharpened, coalesced. My name, again. Silas. The torch quivered violently in my grip. I stood frozen, a statue in rubber boots. The pump labored. The new basement light flickered, threatening darkness. Then, my gaze fixed on the water surface near the center of the room. It stirred, not randomly, but with a horrifying intentionality, bunching upwards, forming a crude, transient shape. The suggestion of a head and shoulders breaking the surface. My pulse throbbed in my throat. The shape dissolved as the pump momentarily stuttered, the water collapsing back into uneven ripples. I switched off the pump, stared. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. After a long moment, I waded cautiously towards the center, boots sloshing, the water now creeping towards my calves. Was there some hidden inlet? A trick of current? I plunged a gloved hand into the frigid, slimy water, groping the concrete floor beneath. Smooth, unbroken, no obvious source. Standing upright again, bracing myself, A wave of raw fear washed through me, instantly countered by a desperate insistence. Imagination. Stress. Nothing more. Perhaps the source lay above. I retreated upstairs, inspecting the plumbing lines in the main floor bathroom and kitchen. Pipes were old, certainly, but appeared intact. No significant leaks presented themselves. Returning to the basement stairwell, I peered down into the now calm water. One more time, flip the switch, watch closely. The pump hummed its monotonous song. Water began its retreat. I remained poised at the top of the stairs, torch beam fixed on the murky floor below. Minutes stretched, then the low thrum vibrated up through the floorboards, growing from a subtle tremor to an audible drone. It seemed to coalesce around a single utterance. "Silas!" My grip tightened on the railing, knuckles white, a profound chill seizing my entire body. The water stirred again, more decisively this time. A torso, arms, pushing upwards from the surface, an aqueous silhouette taking definite form, shoulders, a head, turning vaguely towards the stairs. "Silas!" The voice, though still distorted, was clearer, closer. The torch nearly slipped from my grasp. My heart felt poised to batter its way out of my chest. I slammed the pump switch off. The shape instantly collapsed, sinking back into the brown water without a ripple. The hum ceased. In the ringing silence, my own gasping breath sounded obscenely loud. I killed the basement light, pulled the door shut, and locked it. Outside, in the cab of my truck, tremors ran through my hands. Who do you call about a waterlogged ghost? The absurdity paralyzed me. Telling a friend risked sounding unhinged. Instead, pragmatism won, however thin, back to the hardware store. Advice sought on severe, persistent flooding. The clerk, blessedly mundane, suggested a more powerful pump, perhaps a secondary backup. I bought another pump, heavier than the first. Also, several portable floodlights and sheets of thick rubber. The new plan: drain it fast, illuminate every corner, expose any hidden spring or fissure, deny the shape, deny the voice, focus on the tangible. Evening found me deploying the new arsenal. 2 pumps positioned in opposing corners, floodlights strategically placed, banishing shadows, casting the stained concrete and corroded pipes in harsh, unforgiving relief. I activated both pumps simultaneously. The combined roar was substantial. Water churned and rushed through the twin hoses. For several minutes, only the mechanical din filled the space. Then, inevitably, the hum returned, insidious beneath the pump's noise. I forced myself to remain still, to watch. My name echoed, that garbled, waterlogged intonation. The surface roiled, the shape rose again, more defined now under the stark illumination. A distinctly human form, sculpted from flowing water. Indentations suggested eyes, a mouth, though no true features resolved. Aqueous arms lifted in slow, ponderous gestures, seeming to reach. My knees felt weak, breath ragged, head pounding. I hit the kill switches. The figure dissolved, collapsing back into the flood. I sank to my knees in the cold water, denim instantly soaked, body racked with uncontrollable shaking. Seconds ticked by. One thought dominated. Something resided in that water, and it was trying to emerge. Leaving the pumps inert, I retreated, backing away until my shoulders met the cold, damp concrete wall. My mind raced, seeking rational footholds. Running felt like the only sane option, yet abandoning the task felt equally impossible. Powering the pumps again was unthinkable. I grabbed an old mop leaning nearby and began a futile effort, sloshing water towards the floor drain. The rhythmic, mundane action calmed my racing heart slightly, but made little impact on the water level. Staying the night in this place was out of the question. A plumber, a professional, first thing tomorrow. I made the call on my way out, securing an early appointment, trying to banish the image of the watery silhouette, focusing instead on the familiar glow of tail lights ahead. At home, a cold, tasteless meal preceded a night of fractured sleep, haunted by dreams of drowning rooms and whispering water. Morning brought the plumber, a stolid middle-aged man whose expression suggested he'd seen every variation of domestic disaster. I led him to the basement. The water, predictably, was high again. He surveyed the scene with professional detachment, seeing only a flooded cellar. Setting up his own powerful pump, he began the draining process. We waited. I stood taut, expectant, scanning the water's surface, straining to hear the telltale hum beneath the pump's roar. Nothing. For nearly half an hour, the only sounds were mechanical and dripping. The plumber moved towards a cluster of pipes, tapping, inspecting for flaws. I remained near the center, mesmerized by the receding water, my stomach a tight knot of dread. Then, subtly at first, the hum began. I froze. The plumber, engrossed in his work, seemed oblivious. The voice followed, soft, muffled, yet undeniably my name. Silas. Still, the plumber didn't react. I edged closer to the water. The hum intensified. The shape began to form, rising from the depths, reaching, calling my name with more insistence now. A faint tremor seemed to run through the concrete beneath my boots. "Hey!" I called out to the plumber. As he turned, the shape sank, vanishing instantly. "What's wrong?" he asked, brow furrowed. I stammered something about thinking I saw movement in the water. He shrugged, dismissing it, returning to his pipes. Sweat trickled down my temple. He eventually located a minor crack, insufficient to explain the relentless flooding, and recommended a foundation specialist before packing his tools and leaving around noon. Alone again. I sat on the damp basement steps, staring at the water, now significantly lower but still present. An unnerving compulsion arose. Let the pumps run, see the shape fully formed, understand what it was. Yielding, I plugged in my 2 pumps once more. Water surged through the hoses. The level dropped rapidly. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The hum swelled, vibrating through me. My arms trembled. The silhouette ascended from the flood's epicenter, taller this time, clearer, a defined head, neck, torso. It called my name, the sound thick with the cellar's musty odor. My vision swam slightly at the edges. I stared, transfixed, searching the fluid face for eyes, a mouth. The water swirled violently around its base. One aqueous arm extended further, stretching towards me. My body locked rigid. I couldn't speak, my throat constricted. The silhouette held its form, dripping, water cascading down its ephemeral body. The pumps whirred relentlessly. It advanced an inch, wavered, the voice turning desperate, drawing out my name in a slow, distorted plea. Panic erupted. My hand flew to the switches, slamming them off. The figure collapsed. The water sloshed violently, then settled. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. Boots sinking into the wet concrete, muscles threatening to give way, I backed slowly towards the stairs. Upstairs, I locked the basement door, leaning against it, breath catching in my throat. Conviction settled, cold and hard. That water held something sentient, something unnatural, something that knew my name and desired release. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of anxious pacing. I sifted through my parents' old papers, receipts for foundation work decades past. Nothing more sinister. No mention of wells, cisterns, or anything unusual buried beneath the house. By evening, the truth was unavoidable. This required expertise beyond plumbers or foundation crews. This was something else entirely. A plan formed, vague and uncertain. Find specialists in what? Anomalous structural phenomena? The very thought felt absurd, yet the dread was undeniably real. Drawing the living room curtains against the encroaching night, I tried to rest on the dusty couch. Sleep offered only brief, troubled respite. Waking in darkness, the house felt charged, expectant. The basement remained off-limits, the pumps silent. Let the water rise. Facing that voice, that shape, alone in the dark was inconceivable. Sleep evaded me. The watery figure replayed in my mind's eye, its distorted call echoing. Abandon the house? Flee? But the weight of inheritance, of responsibility, held me fast. Hours passed, staring at the ceiling, every creak and groan of the old structure amplified. Dawn arrived, gray and uncertain. Stiffness had seized my body. My eyes burned from sleeplessness. Gathering my few belongings, I walked out the front door, not looking back at the silent, flooded house. I drove towards the promise of help. Any help, determined to find someone equipped for the inexplicable. Behind me, my parents' house stood sentinel, guarding its sodden secret. The voice in the cellar perhaps stirring again, waiting. What it truly was remained a terrifying mystery. But one thing was certain. I could not face it alone. Nightfall claimed the necropolis, and with it descended a disquietude that coiled low in my belly as my flashlight's beam cut a swathe through the encroaching dark. Unease had been my companion since discovering the small edifice tucked away at the property's ragged fringe, an architectural anomaly absent from the brittle, sepia-toned maps. My supervisor, steeped in indifference, had waved away my concerns. Leave it be, he'd said, but the sentiment chafed. I am the sentinel of this silent city, charged with knowing its every stone, its every shadow. While the main arteries gleam under dutiful lamps, kept immaculate by my hand, a posterior tract surrenders to a thicket of gnarled trees and treacherous earth. It was there, amidst the untamed growth, that the oddity first snagged my gaze. A mausoleum, seemingly hewn from granite, yet possessing a subtly bowed roof and a portal far more ponderous than its neighbors. No mourner ever lingered near its threshold. No cartographer had ever acknowledged its existence. Fear is not a currency I trade in readily. My tenure within these historic grounds has been long, marked by the rhythms of maintenance, sweeping leaf-strewn pathways, sculpting unruly shrubbery, patrolling the perimeter for breaches, ensuring the nocturnal peace remained undisturbed by the living. Vigilance against decay and damage is part of the pact. Most days unfurl with a quiet solemnity, though the place breathes with its own eccentricities, the groan of an ancient gate swinging on unseen hinges, the furtive rustle in the undergrowth. Phantoms of wind and fauna easily dismissed, but this clandestine structure disrupted the familiar cadence. The first time I skirted its perimeter, a whisper of sound snagged the air, tightening the muscles along my spine. A radio, perhaps, drifting from a distant dwelling? No, the notes were too sharp, too defined, the unmistakable chime of piano keys. Extinguishing my light, I stood suspended in the gloom, breath held captive. Silence reclaimed the space. Seconds stretched, then I cast the beam upon the door. Locked, ancient, formidable, cloaked in a patina of deep rust. Through a minuscule fissure near the lintel, I strained to pierce the interior veil, but only impenetrable darkness met my eye. Perhaps the music was a figment, a trick of the weary mind. I shrugged, dismissing the phantom melody, and resumed my rounds. The following day found me burrowed in the cemetery's archives, a cramped office adjacent to the main gate. This place, a vessel of history, hoarded its secrets in aged folders, ink-scrawled ledgers, and typewritten sheets yellowed by decades. Over my midday meal, I sifted through the brittle pages, seeking mention of crypts and family vaults belonging to the long-departed gentry. Nothing matched the peculiar silhouette or the secluded location of the structure I'd found. References to expansions surfaced. Whispers of renovations echoed from the past, yet none corresponded. The omission gnawed at me, a persistent burr under the skin, though I resisted leaping to conclusions. A private vault, perhaps, its registration lost to bureaucratic oversight. That evening, deliberately, I traced the longer circuit, skirting the vicinity of the anomaly. A palpable unease shadowed my steps. The moon remained hidden, lending the darkness an unusual weight. My flashlight's beam danced nervously, illuminating headstones like spectral teeth embedded in the wooded earth. As I drew near the shunned structure, the piano music returned, undeniable now, louder, achingly clear. A slow, deliberate melody unfurled, each note resonant and distinct. My pulse quickened, a frantic drummer against my ribs. A dryness seized my throat, sweat beaded on my palms. Striving for composure, I felt the tremor in my hands betraying me as I held the light steady. I stood rooted, listening. The music flowed without falter, seamless, imbued with the grace of long practice. Logic dictated emptiness within those walls, yet the auditory evidence was irrefutable. Compelled, I advanced to the door, pressing my ear against the cold, unyielding stone. The music swelled, intimate now, as if I stood beside the unseen player. My fingers closed around the handle. It refused to yield, the lock steadfast. A tentative rap upon the heavy wood. Abruptly, the music ceased. "Hello?" I called out, my voice thin in the vast silence. "Is anyone there?" Only the sigh of a faint breeze answered. A chill traced its icy path down my neck, across my shoulders. My gaze swept the surrounding darkness. No other source for the sound was apparent. Retrieving my phone, I glanced at the screen. No signal, useless, though what I intended, whom I might call, remained nebulous. A prickle of trespass, the feeling of intruding upon something sacred or forbidden, urged me away. I retreated, completing my patrol under a heavier shroud of mystery. Morning light stripped the structure of its nocturnal mystique, revealing its mundane face. Walls of weathered gray stone, a roof tiled with chipped, ancient ceramics, and near the apex, an inscription eroded beyond legibility. The door remained stubbornly locked. Circling the building, I discovered a small window on the opposing flank, secured by thick iron bars. The glass behind was filmed with grime, obscuring the interior. My flashlight beam, angled poorly, reflected back from the dusty pane, revealing only profound shadow within. The thought of prying the bars loose flickered, but lacking tools and authorization, I abandoned the notion. That afternoon, I plunged once more into the archives, delving into forgotten boxes stacked in the musty storage room. Brittle folders exhaled the scent of time as I opened them, revealing records of interments from a century past. Handwritten annotations detailed owners, plots, maintenance fees. Still, no mention of the rogue crypt. Resignation began to set in when a small, unlabeled notebook tumbled from a precarious stack. Inside, crude sketches depicted sections of the cemetery layout, likely hasty notes from a long-ago caretaker planning repairs. On the final leaf, a familiar shape materialized, a rough outline mirroring the structure that haunted my thoughts. Beside it, a hurried scribble. Odd addition. Not on official list. Nothing more. No date, no context. A jolt, like a skipped heartbeat. Proof, however scant, that I wasn't the first to notice. As dusk bled into night, my rounds led me back. The piano music commenced for the third time, the same languid, hypnotic melody. This time, mere knocking felt insufficient. I played my flashlight along the door's edges, probing for hidden mechanisms, minute gaps. The music persisted, unwavering. My breath grew shallow, chest constricting. The perfection of the notes felt uncanny, impossible. This edifice stood derelict, devoid of power, its apertures too narrow to admit a piano. Driven by an inexplicable urge, I pushed against the door with my shoulder. It held firm, solid as bedrock. Frustration mounting, I struck the wood sharply with my fist. Once, twice. Silence crashed down, absolute. My ears hummed in the sudden void. Then, a distinct shuffle from within, the sound of weight shifting on a wooden surface. I froze, blood turning to ice water. "Who's there?" I whispered, voice catching. Nothing. After a tense pause, the melody resumed, note for note, restarting its melancholic cycle. My palms slick with sweat. I wiped them on my trousers and backed away, every nerve alight, the fine hairs on my arms erect. Unease curdled into something closer to dread as I retreated into the night. Later, sleep offered no respite, only a vivid dreamscape. I stood inside the crypt, flashlight illuminating an upright piano. Atop it lay a sheaf of papers, my own name, Elias, scrawled in the margins. I awoke with a start, forehead damp with cold sweat. A dream, I insisted, yet its residue clung to me through the morning hours. My next shift arrived freighted with obsessive thoughts. Concealed within my tool bag, nestled amongst wrenches and screwdrivers, lay a crowbar. Around the midnight hour, when stillness reigned absolute over the grounds, I made my way directly to the crypt. The music preceded me, the familiar slow tune already weaving through the trees. My heart hammered against my ribs. Perspiration traced cold paths down my back. My throat felt constricted. Gripping the cold steel of the crowbar, I reached the door and set my flashlight on the ground beside me. The tool's tip found purchase between the heavy door and its stone frame. I threw my weight into it. Metal shrieked in protest. Muscles screamed under the strain, my arm trembling. Inside, the piano played on, its tempo utterly undisturbed. Another heave, fueled by a desperate curiosity, and the ancient lock groaned, then snapped with a sharp report. The door yielded, swinging inward perhaps an inch. A soft pop, followed by profound silence. The music vanished. Holding my breath, I nudged the door wider, sweeping the flashlight beam into the aperture. The air hung thick, stagnant, tasting of decades sealed away. Dust motes danced in the cone of light, tickling my nostrils. Stone walls enclosed a compact space. There, in the center, stood an upright piano draped in a time-stained sheet, its corners frayed. Hesitantly, I crossed the threshold, the light probing the corners. Empty, utterly empty, save for the piano and me. In one corner, a small wooden table, burdened with a pile of aged papers. My hand, unsteady, reached towards the table. A knot tightened in my stomach. I half expected an emergence from behind the piano, a spectral guardian revealed, but nothing stirred. Lifting the topmost sheet, I scrutinized the faded, archaic script. Musical notations sprawled across the page, and there, on the side, penned in stark clarity, Elias, my first name. The date inscribed at the top read 1920, a century ago. My heart pounded a heavy tattoo against my sternum. I scanned the text, references to a caretaker. Then, my surname, spelled without error. It detailed minutiae, the color of my hair, my height, the scope of my duties. It even named the brand of flashlight I habitually carried. A wave of nausea washed over me. Sifting through the other pages revealed more of the same. Rough sketches of the cemetery grounds, annotated with my patrol routes. Notes on the very jeans and boots I favored. I swallowed, the sound loud in the confined space. My breathing grew rapid, shallow. A clammy dampness slicked my skin. My mind struggled to reconcile the impossible data. The scent of old paper and cold stone sharp in my nostrils. A faint dripping echoed from a corner, perhaps seepage from the earth. The piano stood mute. Raising the dusty sheet revealed wood beneath that seemed impossibly pristine, untouched by time or neglect. Tentatively, I depressed a single key. The note resonated, pure and clear, an exact match to the melody that had haunted the night air. A spike of raw anxiety shot through me. Frantically, I scanned the room for hidden speakers, any technological trickery. Nothing. Beneath the stack of papers, a smaller notebook lay partially concealed. I slid it free. Its cover, cracked leather, felt brittle to the touch. Inside, more of the same meticulous handwriting filled the pages. Short entries chronicled nights the caretaker passed by. Caretaker walked past at 11:13 p.m., carrying a flashlight in his left hand. My precise route, meticulously charted. The final entry sent a fresh wave of cold dread through me. He will open the door soon. He will see these pages. He will wonder how this is possible. He must keep this place safe. Comprehension eluded me. My breath hitched. My heart throbbed violently, a frantic pulse in my throat. My legs felt unsteady, threatening to buckle. I stood frozen, flashlight beam jittering across the bare stone walls. No chairs, no benches, no personal effects beyond the piano and its impossible documents. Was this some elaborate century-old prank? But the contemporary details, my flashlight, my clothes, defied such explanation. A strange reluctance warred with the urge to gather the papers, to present this inexplicable evidence to my supervisor. Using my phone, I snapped several photographs, the flash momentarily illuminating faint etches on the walls, random marks, or perhaps fragments of musical staves, too indistinct to decipher. Wiping sweat from my brow, my body remained coiled, primed for flight. A final inspection of the piano, lifting the lid, revealed immaculate strings and hammers, free of dust, seemingly well-maintained, utterly senseless. No one tended this crypt, officially non-existent, no spectral custodian accounted for in the records. Pressing a few more keys yielded the same pure, resonant tones. My skin prickled. Stepping back, breathing hard through my mouth, I knew I couldn't linger. The sensation of being watched, despite the palpable emptiness, was overwhelming. I backed out into the night air, the cool draft a shock against my heated skin. A ragged exhale escaped my lips. Hands trembling, I secured the door as best I could, jamming the broken lock mechanism back into place. Then I turned and hurried towards the familiar lights of the main path, my mind a maelstrom of unanswerable questions. How could my name exist on documents penned a century before my birth? What was the source of that ethereal music? The memory of the slow, looping melody became an indelible brand upon my thoughts. Back in the small office, I attempted to document the incident, omitting the discovery of the papers bearing my name. My report spoke only of an unlisted crypt containing old furnishings, its lock found broken, now temporarily secured. I stared at the empty fields on the form, demanding specifics, a sour taste rising in my throat. A headache began to throb behind my eyes. I saved the incomplete file, unsure who might possibly believe the full truth. I remain the caretaker here. The structure still stands, a silent sentinel in the neglected corner. Each night my patrol carries me past it. Sometimes the faintest strains of piano music drift on the air. Other nights, only silence greets me. I have not ventured inside again since that encounter. Yet the crypt occupies my thoughts constantly, the image of my name on those ancient pages a persistent ghost. Logic insists on a rational explanation, yet none presents itself. Every time I pass that stone edifice, I feel the familiar surge of my pulse, the haunting echo of that melody whispering at the edges of my hearing. Is the piano still draped in its shroud? Do the papers still lie upon the table? Have new notes been added to the chronicle? My supervisor, my colleagues, they remain ignorant. They ask no questions. I offer no truths. My flashlight beam stays resolutely forward as I navigate that darkened path. Yet sometimes my gaze strays, drawn inexorably to that weathered door. I recall the music, how it ceased at my knock, only to resume its lonely vigil. The tension resides permanently in my chest now, a knot tightening whenever the building swims into my peripheral vision. There are no answers, no neat conclusions to package this experience. Only the indelible imprint remains, the archaic date, the script describing my present life, the flawless tone of the unseen piano, and the profound, watchful quiet that descended the moment I breached its threshold. I cannot forget the chilling wrongness of standing alone in that dusty, sealed space, hearing nothing but the frantic rhythm of my own breath against the silence where music should not have been. That is my burden. That is the shadow lengthening behind me as I walk the cemetery's edge at night, forever straining to hear, or perhaps not hear, the faint, impossible melody drifting from behind a heavy door that has no right to exist.